So I'm going to talk today about early sports specialization in children and youth, and try to tie that into how this affects our community health at large. So we'll start out with a couple cases. We'll call them cases. So a couple athletes that you probably are aware of or know. Tiger Woods, arguably one of the better golfers of all time. I think he really changed the game of golf. Pretty well known that Tiger was golfing at a very young age. Actually was swinging a golf club at the age of 11 months. But interesting thing about Tiger is he claims that he was never forced or pushed to golf. He was always the one asking to go play because he wanted to. And that's something that we'll come back and circle back to. Another example, oh, I was one slide behind. The Williams sisters, Venus and Serena, two of the best female athletes ever, and numerous championships, gold medals, everything. If you saw the movie King Richard, you probably know their story, but they started specializing in tennis at a very young age, before grade school, and both of them turned pro at the age of 14. So obviously clear examples of athletes that were very successful that chose to specialize early and did specialize early and were very successful. Want to introduce, if you're not familiar with something called the 10,000 hour rule. This came from a book that was published by or written by Malcolm Gladwell, where he was doing research on expert musicians and basically concluded that in order to become an expert at any skill, you had to devote at least 10,000 hours of practice to that skill. And that's been almost universally applied to other areas, whether that's athletics or surgery or other skills. Sometimes not always accurate, but that's where the 10,000 hour rule comes from. So let's talk about what sports specialization is. Before you can really study something or define whether or not it's helpful or harmful, you have to define what it really is. And to that end, Jayanthi came up with a 3-item scale and a 6-item scale that the research basically uses to help us define, okay, is an athlete specialized in one sport? And so the first 3 items, is the primary sport more important than others? Did the athlete quit other sports to focus on one sport? Does the athlete train or participate in their primary sport more than 8 months out of the year? All those things suggest that this athlete's specializing in just one sport. The 6-item scale includes those 3 items. They're the last 3 items in the 6-item scale, but adds in whether the athlete trains more than 75% of the time in one sport. Do they train to improve skill and miss time with friends as a result? And do they regularly travel out of state for their primary sport? And if you're involved in youth sports, it's not that hard for this to happen pretty quickly. Our kids are specializing at a very early age. So why should we care about this? Well, as John kind of alluded to, we have this growing problem of obesity, diabetes, heart disease in our adult population. It's happening at younger and younger ages. There's growing evidence that supports the benefits of physical activity throughout life. And right now, 1/3 of our adults don't meet the minimum physical activity recommendations. So despite what we know, we're kind of not doing a very good job at it as a community. Inactive adults are more likely to have inactive children, and then these inactive children are more likely to become inactive adults. In addition to that, we have rising physical inactivity in amongst our youth and our kids. Almost 1/4 of elementary schools in this country don't have organized PE, which is crazy to me. Like, it's no wonder they hate school. It's just, how would you not have PE in elementary school? So how does this relate to sports specialization? Well, as studies have been done on this, the risks, the 2 main risks that always rise to the top that are evident in every study is that these kids get burned out, or higher risk of burnout, and obviously injury, particularly overuse injury, which is something I see almost every day. So a burned out athlete usually doesn't return to sport. They become inactive, and so then they become inactive adults. Overuse injuries are some of the hardest to get better, and just challenging, and that leads to more mental burnout. So eventually it leads to inactivity, which then contributes to this problem. So what are our kids hearing? So when they're being asked about or thinking about specializing one sport, they're being told that if they don't, they're going to fall behind other athletes, If they do specialize, it's going to improve their chance for a college scholarship. It's the only way they can be seen. It's the only way they can reach their full potential. And that's what they're hearing. So then athletes come to us, or they might ask our advice, and parents might ask our advice. Is this really what it takes? Is this what has to be done for my child to be able to achieve their potential and have success? And what we can tell them is that the answer is no. There's this growing body of literature that suggests that youth sports specialization is not necessary to achieve elite performance in most sports. And we're going to cover a couple of these studies. Gymnastics and figure skating seem to be the outliers, although with the way our U.S. women's gymnastics team did this last Olympics, you might question that. They were older and as far as ages for gymnasts go, so we'll see. Studies also show that athletes that are elite tend to specialize later compared to their non-elite peers that specialize at a younger age. Another study showed that early youth sports specialization did not show improved task-related performance outcomes. So basically measurable things like standing broad jump, control, neuromuscular control, anterior reach, none of those were improved by athletes that specialized early versus those that didn't. Another interesting study showed us that 42% of D1 athletes specialized before college. So that means that almost 60% of college D1 athletes did not specialize before college. So it's kind of surprising. It's not really what you hear, but 60%, close to anyway, didn't specialize before college. Another study showed that 11 to 15-year-old multi-sport athletes were 1.4 to 3.7 times more likely to achieve elite level. So it actually increased their chance of becoming an elite athlete if they were a multi-sport athlete when they were younger. And because of the risks of burnout and injury, most medical organizations have recommended that we try to encourage our kids to delay specialization until late teenage years if possible. This was a really cool study that I liked. I wanted to point out. This was done by Paul Ford. It was a study where they looked at 16-year-old professional football or soccer players in the UK. And they basically wanted to know, what did these football players do when they were 6 to 12 years old? What did they do when they were kids? And they compared these to a control group of soccer players of the same age that spent the same amount of time practicing soccer. They were soccer players too. They just didn't achieve professional level. And so when they compared these professional athletes to these non-professional athletes, they found that there was no difference in the amount of time they spent practicing, playing in games, involved in competitions, or involvement in other sports. But what they did find a significant difference in was that the professional elite group spent significantly more hours per year in unstructured soccer activities. So basically, when these kids didn't have scheduled practices or games, they were in the backyard juggling and kicking the ball in the goal and doing soccer activities because they wanted to, because it was their choice. They enjoyed it. So it raises the question, does enjoyment of the sport and intrinsic motivation is that really what predicts elite performance? Kind of brings up the Tiger Woods question, because he was the one who always wanted to play golf. The Sports Gene is a really excellent read if you're interested in the topic. It's a book written by David Epstein. He looked at the nature versus nurture in elite athletes. He refutes the 10,000-hour rule in relation to sports activity and athletes. Concludes that practice does matter, but its power and potential varies by individual. The sports gene does not exist. There is not a sports gene. And he concluded that elite athletic achievement is affected by multiple factors, including inherited and genetic factors, cultural and psychological factors, as well as their training. So kind of not surprising when you think about it, but it's good to have it emphasized and basically determined through science. A couple other cases to finish up with. Everybody knows LeBron James, one of the greatest basketball players of all time. LeBron played college football or high school football until his junior year. He was recruited as a junior, could have played college football. I think he would have been an amazing NFL player. He made the right choice, but a multi-sport athlete well into his late teens. Abby Wambach, one of the best soccer players in this country, if not in the whole world. Abby was a very good basketball player in high school. She was also recruited to play college basketball, but chose soccer. And Roger Federer, amazing, one of the greatest tennis players of all time, I would argue, and just an amazing individual. Roger argued that his hand-eye coordination was really due to the sports he played as a child and a youth, including badminton, basketball, soccer, and of course tennis. So how can we respond to people when they ask us, is this what it takes? Is this what my child or my kid or my neighbor has to do to be an elite athlete? Well, we can respond that there's evidence. We have good, solid evidence that no, early sports specialization does not improve your chance to achieve elite status. It does increase your risk of injury. And I think this is important because anything we can do to encourage a love for physical activity into adulthood will improve the health of our communities. One last thing I wanted to point out, this is something I came across just a couple months ago. This is called the Strong Youth Project. If you're interested, it's a program run by the College of Exercise Science here at BYU. And basically their aim is to try to put information like this into the hands of athletes, parents, coaches, so that they can actually make educated decisions about what they're going to do. So this is a good resource to use yourself or to point people in the direction to. If you're interested, there's some of my resources, things that I used, and hope that was helpful for you guys. Thank you guys.